to the next in a series of the process behind our conversations with founders, product people, makers, and Betsy Mikel here, which is a content designer. And we basically discuss how the process behind creating a specific project that they work in. So welcome, Betsy Mikel from Mozilla.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so as Billy mentioned, my name is Betsy. I am a content designer at Mozilla, which makes a Firefox browser, among a few other things. And I have been working in this field for a few years now, and I have a background in kind of a smorgasbord of different types of content. So I started off with a journalism degree, graduated in 2008, right when the economy crashed. So decided not to pursue journalism and went more to the marketing advertising route. And I started my early career writing Facebook ads right when that was a cool thing, and worked at a few Chicago tech startups, which is actually where I met Billy. We worked at Threadless together.
Yeah, so
and as I was growing in my career as a copywriter, I learned about this really amazing world called user experience. And I was very interested in it, started to learn more about it, and learned that there was an actual job where it was someone's job to write the words behind the screen, and not just to write those words, but to actually help plan the content that goes on the screen and is actually part of the design process too. So I'm really excited to talk to Billy today and walk you all through a recent project, one being because there is kind of this recent trend where there's this discovery that content is part of the design process, which I'm like, yay, I thought that the whole time, but now other people are realizing it too. So we do call ourselves designers. We can have lots of debates about the different job titles behind UX writing and content strategy and content design. But the way that I think about it is that we show up to projects in the same way that a designer would. It's just that the content is our form factor versus visual design or interaction design, and we think through problems in a lot of the same ways. So I can share a little bit more about how we do that.
Awesome. To kick it off, I would like to, maybe you can briefly discuss what your process is for designing a new product.
Sure. I think you touched on this in a few interviews before. There's no one project is the same. There's lots of different processes, but we kind of pull things through our toolkit depending on the size and the scope of the project. How do we tackle that? So new products, super fresh and exciting. It can also be super overwhelming. Where do you even start? So I go about this in a few ways. I kind of call this like a fact-finding mission, and I kind of start gathering resources and information. So there's a few ways to go about this. First off, just kind of start talking to people internally. Hey, has anyone done any research on this? Has anyone pulled any research from external sources? Is there any documentation? It's possible that this product maybe started a while ago and I'm just coming to it now. So trying to find out what everybody else knows, essentially, trying to bring myself up to speed in that way. I might go so far as to conduct some informal stakeholder interviews or subject matter expert interviews, people who might be deep experts on some things. I can essentially interview those people and try to understand that information, consolidate it, synthesize it for myself. If it's a brand new product, I'm going to probably want to do some auditing too. I have a real example of a product they worked on a couple of years ago. It's called Firefox Monitor. It is a service that lives outside the Firefox browser. It's its own standalone website product that you can use to monitor your email address for data breaches. And Firefox Monitor is not the only product that does this. So I went on this external audit where I essentially audited all of their breach monitoring services to see what they did well, what they didn't do so well, where their gaps were, where the opportunities were for us. And that was a way to really familiarize myself with what else was on the market, but also to start seeking out some opportunities of how we could, when we were ready to start putting together the content plan for this product, what we could do. So yeah, that's the beginning stages of a new product exploration.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's awesome. My follow-up every time I ask that question is the difference between creating a new product versus enhancing an existing one. So like what would be the things that are the same and the things that are different when you're you already have a mature product essentially, but you need to add features?
I would say the same steps are the same, but when you get the opportunity to work on something, like perhaps a feature enhancement or to fix a problem with your current product, in addition to all those other things, you have two extra layers of information that are super valuable. And one of those is data. Hopefully you have some. And the second is institutional knowledge, either from yourself or other people at your organization. So the data aspect is two parts within that. One, if you can capture any data of how people are actually interacting with that feature or that thing. I'm going to talk later about the Firefox application menu. So we went on this kind of data hunt to see what things were people clicking on and what labels were resonating with people. And then you can also look into your user research database. So we have an amazing user research repository. We have an awesome UR team here at Mozilla who does an excellent job at cataloging all prior research that they've done before. So it's really easy to go in there. Hey, has anyone done any research on this? Even if that research was done 3 years ago, 5 years ago, there could be something in there that's really relevant. So try to collect both qualitative and quantitative data. And the second is that institutional knowledge. So there are people who work at your organization who have been there much longer than you, who know things, and it is your job to go find those things. And a specific example I'm going to talk about this application menu is we have a component in the menu that is around the Firefox account, which seems really simple, but it's actually really complicated. There's several things you can do there. In addition to signing in and signing out, you can sync up other devices. And there's a whole team that works on that and has been working on that for years. So when we started working on this project, we looped that team in. We went to them with questions. They were so patient and receptive to us coming at them. But we essentially wanted to know what they knew and why did they make certain decisions in the past and how could we use those decisions to inform what we were doing in the future. All this is to say that before you actually start doing any of the design work, you're doing a lot of talking and seeking out information and just trying to gather knowledge. And that's a part of any design process that I don't think gets as much kind of attention as you have to do a lot of detective work, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's interesting. I've always felt, I've experienced it, and I've heard from other people, a resistance to what we call, any sort of research, but maybe if we call it detective work, maybe it's more palatable to people. But I think the institutional knowledge on top of the data, and you can even do a combination to bring the data to the institutional knowledge, like why did we make these changes? What were the previous users doing? And then we made the update, and here's what the current users are doing. It's so interesting, and it does help down the road. I'm sure all of that research and all that knowledge built the context around why you're here now, and then it'll help you push forward to make your updates much easier. Let's dive into the project that we're going to talk about.
So yeah, I work for the Firefox browser, and Firefox, for those that aren't familiar, has been around a long time, and we recently decided to do a big refresh. So this is exciting for us on the content team and really on the whole UX team, because there were several changes to the front end UI that we had been wanting to make for a long time. So this big refresh is launching in June. So check it out, download Firefox, hope you love it. And it encompassed a huge amount of things that are in the browser. So redesign tabs, toolbar, address menu, several components, modals, panels, messaging surfaces. It was a lot. For today, I'm going to focus on one portion of that, which is our application menu. So this is the menu that you open when you need to navigate to a different part of the browser. For example, if you want to go change your settings, if you want to log into your account, if you want to find your bookmarks, access your history. And what I'm going to talk about today is how the content team came together. And this is really exciting. We have two content designers at Mozilla. It's myself and my colleague, Meridell Walkington. And we both got to work on this project together, which is so super rare. Usually, just because there's only two of us, we work on different projects. But because this was such a big one, we were able to collaborate on it together. So although I'm presenting the work, I definitely want to give Meridell a big shout out and it was great to work with her. We are stronger together, and it was really amazing to be able to collaborate together on redesigning the application menu. So the first step in this project is really to analyze what our current state of affairs is and to look at what we've got. Also, a note, where I'm sharing our Macintosh version of the menu. We also have a Windows version and a Linux version. We don't forget about you. This is one thing that I won't spend too much time on, but I do want to draw attention to that there are some nuances and differences in how our software shows up, how the visual treatment of it, depending on the operating system, which is something before I got into content design, I did not even know. I did not know that a Windows user might see things differently than I see them. So that's something that you need to consider, and something that I think, at least it took me by surprise because I've been using a Mac for a long time. So a lot of our users are not on Mac. A lot of them are on Windows. So we really need to understand the different access points and the nuances in the operating systems because they do reflect differently sometimes. So our first kind of step is to gather data to make some decisions. We know what our menu is. And I kind of referenced this early in the interview of how we want to kind of go on that detective finding mission and start gathering some data, see if previous user research has been conducted, talk to people at the organization who are really familiar with this feature or aspects of this feature that we can use to inform our decisions. This project touched on a lot of different aspects of even the menu itself, but I'll just go over a few high-level things here. So drawing attention to some of the things that we knew we wanted to change. Our current menu had labels in it, and some items had labels, some didn't. And we realized that this put a really heavy cognitive load on users. It gave them a lot to kind of sift through as they're trying to find what they need in that menu. So we knew that we needed to address that. We also weren't really sure why some items in this menu were grouped together. Historically, things had kind of just been added over time and basically added on a one-off basis. And it might make sense within a silo or within a specific project to just add one thing into a menu. But when you have 5 or 6 different people or more over time, over many years, making those individual decisions about individual menu label items, if you step back and look at all of it, it kind of didn't really make sense. So we wanted to address that. How are we going to put together things that actually make sense? We also knew that some of the labels in the menu itself, and when I say label, I mean the text element, were confusing to people. We had a lot of historical data. We had previous user research that some labels, such as this library metaphor, tripped people up. Library is the place where we house your stuff, essentially, like your bookmarks, your history, your downloads. But people didn't know that they could use library to find those things. So we wanted to address that.
That was the one that would stuck out to me always. It was like, what is the library?
Yeah, you're not the only one.
Redesign, yeah.
Yeah, you and millions of people.
Books, and I'm like, what do the books mean? Okay.
Well, the library is no longer with our new redesign. So spoiler alert. And I'm only showing the top level here, but and I will not spare you, but there are so many submenus upon submenus upon submenus that existed beyond. So you'll see the little arrow on the right, this little chevron. You could click into those and it just kind of proliferated, and it was really easy to get lost and get to some dead ends. So although I'm just talking about the high level menu here, because this is the first thing that you see, we also did a lot of cleanup work in streamlining and addressing some of those just kind of submenus as well. So that was something that we tackled. As far as the content design process, what is the first thing that we do? If you have worked with a content designer before, you will not be surprised to learn that we love a good table. We love a good spreadsheet. Billy's laughing. Well, I might put a question on you, Billy. Why do you think that is?
I think it's just easy to organize information.
Yeah, we do love a good table. And although the tables are, the use of them is, like you said, to organize information. I alluded to earlier how we had this menu that had a lot of different items in different places. Like where should we put things? Where goes what? Where do things go? And we actually got this really good guidance from, I'm going to do another shout out here to our senior design manager, Michelle Hoybush, who has been in the content strategy field much longer than I have. And when you are looking at a daunting task in front of you, how am I going to organize all this content? Where do things go? I know that it isn't right, but I don't know how to fix it. Instead of trying to fix it, she advised that we take a step back and just start grouping like items together. It's simple, like anyone can do that, right? And it kind of helps you take some baby steps into how you're going to solve it eventually. So the table, yes, it could be overwhelming, and depending on the size of the project, sometimes they do get really big and these spreadsheets have multiple tabs and oh my gosh. But if you can start organizing the information, you can start thinking through it, and you can start getting ready to actually write. We organize these, what we call semantic groupings. It's a little bit of jargon, insider content lingo, but essentially it just means putting things that are similar together. And just by grouping those in this table, it started to help us see not even necessarily what we were going to keep or what we were going to move or what we were going to cut, but what went with what. And so that helped us move forward in how we were going to make decisions about how we were going to organize this menu.
That's awesome. One thing I wanted to add briefly is one way, if you don't feel like I'm not a content designer, I can't do something called semantic groupings. You totally can. There's a technique that we use in UX called card sorting for these types of purposes too. So I will link to some card sorting information if you feel like you need a place to start that you're not sure of.
Yeah, card sorting is great and kind of fun. I don't know, I'm going to embarrass myself here, but when I started at my first UX job, like everyone was talking about card sorting, like, what are they talking about? Like I had to Google it. I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Like it's something that I was already doing, but I didn't know there was actually a term for it.
The vocabulary that we use sometimes trips people up, and you're like, okay, it's a fancy way of saying we're just going to, do this very simple process of organizing things according to the category.
The next phase of this project, which I know Billy's gonna be really excited about, because I'm going to talk about wireframing. Cue the DJ sound.
Party.
We, the content design team at Firefox, have started to incorporate wireframing in our process for several reasons. And when I talk about wireframes, I deliberately chose this screen to show you how low fidelity it is and how just kind of basic it is. So we actually started doing wireframes in Google Slides. We call them wire slides. And this is literally just drawing boxes. It is drawing rectangles, lines. So it wasn't too difficult, nothing too fancy. What wireframing helps us do is it helps us kind of move beyond that scary table stage and start organizing the information in the appropriate hierarchy. And it's really low barrier to entry. It's really easy to just start editing, to start putting words in, and to start thinking through how you're going to put, where in this menu are we going to put certain items. What we have found is that this really low fidelity wireframe process is also an excellent way to start getting alignment and to start bringing in other people into your process. So there's questions that come up a lot of when do you do stakeholder reviews? How do you make sure that people are aligned? And my response to that is as often and early as possible. And if you can use a wireframe to align your team, the next phases in visual design is just going to go so much more smoothly because you already have the content set. That doesn't mean that the visual design, other things might not come out. You might not continue to make changes on the content, but it gets you pretty far so that it makes that second phase of the process much smoother. And when I talk about alignment, what do I mean by that? For this process, we got this into our wire slide. We got as far as we possibly could with our own knowledge. And then we started to bring in our PM and our engineers and ask them, hey, what do you think of this? And when people have something in front of them that they can react to, they might realize they know something that they didn't mention before. They might realize, we can't technically do that for some reason. I can't think of a good example, but they might not have been able to pull that out of their head. But once they see what you're asking, what the proposal is, like, can you do this? That they have a specific piece of knowledge they can add. Or the PM, for example, might see, I think we actually need to loop in this other PM. For example, we have this whole web developer panel within the Firefox application menu. Let's loop in that PM to make sure that they're on board with this, or they might have some additional knowledge to add. So this wire slide I don't have an exact number because a lot of these changes are minimal, they're tweaks, but we probably went through 10, maybe 15 variations of this before we landed on this is pretty good. We think that we're all aligned on this. Now we're ready to move this into the visual design stage.
It's so interesting. I mean, I mean, you can see the visuals of what this simple wireframe is, but imagine going through 10 to 15 iterations on a high fidelity Figma file. Not everyone could do that. It would only be the designer. So that's what I always like to promote the impact of wireframing, is because the PM, the engineer, everyone can go into a Google slide and change the word or add something or make a comment very easily.
Yeah.
That you could then very easily make an update to. So that just like you even stated, the low sort of barrier of entry to this type of work is why it's so great, because you can do it now instead of having to do it down the road when it's a lot harder to make those changes. So
I will say a note of caution. We did hit our limit with, we kind of pushed the limits of the Google slide format. I'm just showing you one wire slide. The document that we made, I mentioned there was several submenus. We worked on a lot of different menus for this project. And the comment feature, once you start commenting, it gets a little messy. And we did, this did come out in one of our retros. So someone said, I never want to see a Google slide comment ever again.
I never try to push Balsamiq, but like, hey, maybe give it a try. I don't know. But you do state that you're going to be moving to Figma, which
yeah, it's like super low stakes. It like doesn't feel like when you put something that's really polished in front of people, in front of PM, in front of engineers, in front of stakeholders, it starts to feel really real, and it doesn't feel as collaborative, or it doesn't feel maybe like people can provide their feedback. Don't worry, the stakeholders who provide feedback will always provide the feedback no matter what. But
sure.
The low fidelity nature of it just kind of lowers the stakes, and it just makes it feel like we're just workshopping something together. We're just getting it further along. We're iterating on it together. And that's really what design is. And that's what you want the process to be. Okay, so I'll move on to the next phase, which is once we get things pretty far in our beautiful wire slides, we're going to take this into visual design. So our team recently moved to Figma, and that's where we applied the visual design. We did not do it ourselves. This is kind of where content design steps back and lets visual design take over. But it's not so much a handoff process, but more that one reason why I love Figma is that we can actually be involved. There might be some late in the game changes. This will always happen. So we can actually go into the Figma file, change the content, maybe a label. Maybe we need to reopen a decision that we made, change something just based on some feedback we got. So a few things to draw attention to in the changes that we made for the after menu is that I referenced the icons earlier. So we made a decision to remove the icons to improve the scannability. There was a lot of discussion about this. This was not a decision that was made lightly. There are a lot of opinions on this. There's a lot of data research. Ultimately, we decided that it was the best decision for us to remove those icons, because then people could just quickly scan that menu, find what they were looking for. We also, I mentioned the library metaphor. We removed the library metaphor and we brought the things that were underneath that in the submenu, we brought those one level up. So instead of having to click library, go to bookmarks, scrap library, and just bring bookmarks up higher. So this is something to draw attention to, because we talk a lot about in content, we want to be clear, we want to be concise, we want to be short. All of that is true. In this case, we actually added 3 items in place of 1. And we thought that was really important because it helped people access their things, help them get where they were going faster rather than burying stuff. So content is not always about making things short. Sometimes it's about how can we be clear? It might include adding some language. So yeah, surprise.
Well, simplifying stuff sometimes, or clarifying, doesn't mean, less stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, it does sometimes, but it doesn't always. So we like to say clarity always trumps brevity. So you want things to be super short, but if you need a little bit of extra space, a few extra characters, an extra sentence perhaps to be more clear, we will always advocate for that. We grouped the like items together. I showed that semantic table before. This is kind of what the reflection of that is before. So from before, we have our bookmarks, our history, downloads, your add-ons and themes, those are all together in the same place. I talked about the submenus, we reduced those, we did a lot of consolidation. And we also, one thing I'd like to draw attention to is this is a big win for us in the content design team. We standardized the label for settings. Previously, we used different language in Windows, we used different language in Mac, we did different language in Linux. There were bugs open for years about this issue of like, what should we do? And we had never had the opportunity to make a standardization change just because we had never visited this menu in a holistic fashion before. And so we were so excited that we were just going to call them settings everywhere. And every platform gets a settings label instead of 3 different things. One more layer to add to the content design process is whenever possible, we do try to do user research. This allows us to essentially validate the design, validate the information architecture, see if people can actually find what they're looking for. If you can discover that through a user testing study, then you can make those changes before it gets into code, before it's built, before people start getting mad about it and can't find their stuff. So it takes a little bit of extra time, but it's time that's a worthwhile investment. And we saw really good results. People use words like clean, familiar, simple, easy, words that are just music to our ears of being able to find what they're looking for. Once we had this final stage of the menu complete, it's going into code, we're working with engineers to finalize everything. Our work is definitely not done, because what we need to do at that point is we've made all these decisions. We've made micro decisions, maybe hundreds of them. And how do we consolidate that information, that knowledge? I talked about institutional knowledge before. Now we have some, we've gained some through this project. How are we going to share the institutional knowledge to the next person? As much as we like to believe that the menu is never going to change, and it's just going to exist in this beautiful state forever and ever as when we launched it, that is likely not the reality. The blessing and the curse of software is that it's always changing. So inevitably, who knows, like a month from now, 6 months from now, there will be a change request on this menu. I cannot predict what it will be, but I can predict that it definitely will happen. And it's very possible that myself or Meridel is not staffed to that project. We're working on other stuff. So how do we carry forth the decisions that we made so that whoever picks up that work can carry that through? And this is where the content design principles come in. So we essentially went through all the work that we did. We had a lot of conversations, and we just put down on paper, here are the principles that we developed for this menu. And if future changes need to happen, here's some guidelines to follow. So for example, we're not going to use icons. We may use them sparingly, but this is a change that is different from what we did before. We are going to group like items together for consistency. And we want to be concise, but like I said, not for the sake of clarity. So there's several principles here, and we make sure that is available on our internal wiki. And if anyone needs to make changes in the future, we hope that they'll reference this and the menu can go on living in a beautiful, consistent state.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting. I feel like I have not done this before, and it's such a great way to end a project, especially in software, like you said, one that will eventually be updated again. But just clearly stating the reasons why the decisions were made in a way that you can use as instructions to continue that design is the perfect example of design principles here. So
yeah, and it's validating for the work that you did too. You're in the weeds, you're in the thick of things. You are, however long this project took from end to end, I don't even know, months. This was a portion of a larger project, so it was all happening at once. And at some point, you end up working with engineering, and engineering ramps up and essentially design ramps down. Like we're gonna keep working with them if open questions come up, but at some point you kind of just are no longer needed essentially because the product is going live, and we're already going to be staffed to new projects. And so actually, by the time that this launches, I actually kind of forgot about it, like it was a month or two ago. And so it's really, really good to sit and think about it and think of what work did I actually do and what actually came out of that. And it's not always the most exciting thing to do. You're probably so sick of the work at that point because you've been working on it for so long. But if you can share that knowledge back with other people at your organization, it's really valuable.
Yeah, and you're doing a lot of I guess pre-work or future-proof work, in my opinion.
But yeah, it's a good way to come full circle and actually think, what were the principles that we actually developed while we did this work? Kind of like a little side note around content, a big part of our work is writing content guidelines, working on voice and tone. And it's really hard to do that stuff without actually doing the work. And the way I like to approach that is start with what you've got and then constantly update them. So we have content guidelines for our products. We have guidelines around voice. We have guidelines around tone, but those are living documents that constantly evolve, and you can't create that stuff in a silo. You have to create it as you are working on things. So, like, for example, a lot of things that came out of this project, we ended up updating our content guidelines. We ended up updating our guidance around if you should use settings or options or preferences or none, just use settings and things like that. So always be updating. That's my
that's
mantra.
Part of our job, right? Everything evolves.
Yeah. So I just have one last image here, and this is just kind of the final reveal, although I've been showing images of this throughout the whole time. The application menu does not exist all by itself. It exists within the whole browser frame, just to show what it looks like in full context. And the point that I want to make here is that it looks really streamlined and simple and clear. It's a big win for us. This is the truth in content. This is the truth in information architecture. And this is the truth in design, that the simpler and cleaner something looks, the more work that probably went into it. So to a non-designer's eye, it probably is just like, oh, it's a menu. Well, great. And I actually don't really care if our users think it looks great. I just care about them being able to find what they're looking for and for them to move quickly and efficiently. And that is the true win for us. So if we can just save you a split second or multiple seconds or minutes, like trying to find, like, oh, where are my settings? I can't find them. This is so frustrating, to just going there without even thinking about it, then that means that we have done our jobs. So that is kind of just to put a final point on why I love this work. I really do feel like my job is in service to people. And if I can just guide them as they're using the software and get them on their way and they don't even realize the work that I did, then that means I've done my job, and it's great.
That's awesome. That's so great. Yeah, that's what I want every UX designer, people who build software, to think. Like, almost the visual styling is invisible, and you can just find intuitively what you need to find, and you're not frustrated. And you can go through your tasks as simple as possible.
Yeah, and it's one thing that we like to say on our team is the actual writing. We call them strings in software, like writing the actual strings is probably the last, I want to say 10% of the work. So what you see in front of you, those are the words. Yes, we wrote those, we made decisions about those, we changed things, but the real work that went into this was that information architecture work, that understanding where things went, putting things in like categories together, making decisions about that icon removal, and all of that is content design. The word content is like a little bit of a misnomer, because content really just means everything. So yeah, the icon is content. The button is like what you put on that button is content. The order of things and the hierarchy of things is content. And the words is just kind of icing on the cake. And it's actually really easy to write the words once you've done all that other work. The writing is like, it's so easy, but if you don't know what to write because you don't have all their stuff figured out, then you're kind of stuck.
One of the principles that you stated was like keeping it streamlined for scanning purposes. And I think it's so important for the user and usability in general. And it's also one of the most difficult things to sort of get buy-in on, I think, because it seems kind of like, this seems boring, or this seems plain. It's like, you don't want anyone to actually see it. They just want to use it as fast as possible. It's a utility more than it is like an element to delight people, or whatever that word is.
I love that. It is so true. I mean, Firefox is a utility product. We are literally the box, the frame in which you access the internet, and you are coming to Firefox to do whatever you're going to do. Like open your email, search, research that awesome trip you're going to take, book an Airbnb, and it is not our job to get in the way of it. Our job is actually to fade in the background and just like help you get on your way. So yeah, I think it's really exciting to work for utility because we serve so many people. We have a global audience, and if I can make those people's internet lives a little bit better by some of these just small changes, then I feel like I've had a good day.
Yeah, definitely.